Hello, Kansas and Western fans. As I told you before, when I started working on this Portland cement plant scene for these couple of weeks, I was going to record the process of doing concrete. And down here in my little test bed, you can see how far I've gotten with it. I think I've settled on a paint color, and it's this folk art terracotta. I think you can get it at Walmart or Hobby Lobby. Actually, that says Hobby Lobby right there. Anyway, I like this color for concrete. Um, I'm happy with using the angle styrene in between the rails. Using a piece of styrene as a scree between the outer rails and the neighboring track, it works okay. The joint compound I think is a little bit clumpy sometimes, so I think it's going to take a second coat, maybe like a first base coat, which this would be, and then another skim coat, which is pretty typical for joint compound, right? You can't get away with one coat ever, seems like. But I went ahead and painted it anyway just to see if I like the color on a larger scale. And I think I do. And it adds a little texture too. It's probably too hard to see on camera here, but in reality, it's pretty nice. The reason that this is a little bit darker between the rails is because I tried using a light gray paint and it was too dark, I thought. So I just went over it with this concrete. So this will probably be the final color. And if cracks develop, because again, it's joint compound, it does tend to shrink a little bit. That's okay. Concrete cracks. And you ask any concrete contractor and they'll tell you, especially large areas. I will probably go back and, excuse me, add expansion joints later, probably before the painting process. But since this isn't a final coat anyway, this was really just a test to see if I was able, skill-wise to do this without making a giant mess and without ruining my track. And I think I've done that. But again, it's going to take a skim final coat, I think, between the two tracks. So anyway, moving on. So I'm going to go ahead and try this now at the end of my yard. We're going to do about a foot-long segment complete. That way, if it's ruined, it's at the end. It's at the end of the yard. We're just going to start with this section. Now, I've removed all the buildings, and what I've decided to do there is I'm going to mount all the buildings on 0.125 inch thick styrene, which is 1/8 of an inch. And that is the same thickness as this track. So I want the buildings to sit at the same level as the tops of the rails, because I think that's what you would see in reality. And so what I'm going to do is I had to order some because my local hobby town didn't have any. So once that comes in, and we got the building sitting up here, I'm going to cut out probably a rectangle, because I don't want to try to mess with cutting those curves, for the silo here, which will basically just be the footprint. And once I have that cut to size for each building, including the stack here, and then over here we've got kind of the unloading bay. Once I have those cut, I will glue those in position where the footprints are going to go. And then those pieces of styrene will stay put. I'll probably go ahead and paint them a concrete color, but then that's where my buildings will sit. Because I'm not real keen on having my buildings glued to the layout for lots of reasons. But this way their footprint will remain intact. And then since those footprints will be the same thickness as the track, I'll be able to use those as kind of a scree wall or something, I don't know what you call that, to fill in the joint compound between the building footprints and the tracks. That's the thinking anyway. Again, I have to get that styrene in, hopefully have it by the end of the week so I can try that, and I will show you that effort. For the meantime, though, I've got this double stick tape that I'm using for a wall here around the ends of the concrete. The double stick tape, I think, is a 1/16 of an inch thick, so I had to stack it one on top of the other. I didn't bother pulling the backing off of one side because I'm trying to use it as a scree, a wall. So I want to be able to obviously slide my, let's see if I have that so I can show you what I'm talking about. I have my piece of styrene here, just a scrap piece. It's probably 0.08 or 0.06 thick. But basically I'll spread the joint compound in the area here and then use this to make it level. So that's the idea anyway. That's what I did down here. And it worked to some degree, but it will take a finish coat, and that is just fine with me. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and continue on with adding this tape, and we're going to see how this first 12 inches look. I'll check in with you. Oh, I forgot to add that I am adding that angle there in the middle. Ran out of that too, so I'm waiting on that to order or come in I think it's from Illinois. The place Evergreen Products is where it comes from. So it shouldn't take too long to get here, hopefully. And we'll get that installed and get all that joint compound added, and I'll check in with you once that's done. Okay, so as a person who records doing things on my layout, I often find it difficult to remember to do said recording on my layout. So I apologize for that, but I did want to show you this process that I'm doing. And again, I'm just using joint compound to fill these gaps. I use this 1/4 inch tape to cover both the rail and the angle for the inside of the rail, just so I don't get any of this joint compound in between those things. I'm doing this in 3 segments, basically. I'm doing this side of the tracks, then I'll do the interior of the tracks, and then I'll do the other side of the tracks. So we're going to see how this goes. I'm just going to record a little bit of this so you can see how I do it. Right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm trying to get this as perfect as I can with this little tool, and then I'll come back and scree it with my little piece of styrene here. And this little clay work tool has been very handy. I've used it for all kinds of things, especially when spreading small amounts of joint compound around in a fairly accurate manner. I'm sure it worked just fine with plaster and whatnot. I just haven't chosen to use plaster yet as a medium, just because honestly it's just extra work involved. You have to mix it up. You have to make sure it's the right mix. Whereas I know joint compound is already ready mixed, so I just open the lid and start using it. I'm sure there's differences to properties, but this is just what I've decided to go with. All right, I'm going to pause recording here for a second while I finish this little section down to about here, and then I'll come back and show you how I scree it. All right, let's see how well this works. Now, what I want to do is, again, I'm doing this in sections, but the nice thing about this wide, this 1/2 inch wide double stick tape is I'm going to favor going from rail to tape, because I don't really care how much gets on this tape. It's going to be removed and thrown away. But I want to try to avoid getting anything more into the tracks than I can, because I think if I get dried particles in between those ties, when I come back and do that section, the fresh joint compound is going to want to pick those particles up, and it's going to make it all lumpy. So I'm going to try to avoid that. Also want to try to avoid too much of this stuff getting on the other side of the joint compound, because I don't want it to get on the bottom, although I suppose I could clean that up. Now, from my test bed, I've decided that I probably will definitely need to do a second coat, like a skim coat. So I'm not going to worry about getting this too perfect, because it's going to be a lot easier to do a skim coat with this dry. But for the real valleys, like you can see one right there in the foreground, I'm going to just try to add a little bit more joint compound to fill that before I try to scree it again. This might be a good idea to have just a little bit of a hump, I guess you could say, in the middle of the material, just to make sure you have more than you need when you scree it to fill all those little voids. It's funny because I sound like I think I know what I'm doing. I don't. This is all still, I mean, this is the second time I've tried this, really, maybe third. So I'm still learning as I go. So definitely don't take anything that I say to heart. Still learning. And if there's little gaps or bubbles, I'm not too worried about that. That's going to be pretty easy to fill in a second coat. I guess what you could say is I'm really just looking for a solid base for this first round, so that when I come back into the skim coat, it's pretty quick and easy to do. My use of joint compound is completely based on sheetrocking and mudding my entire basement in my house, because it was unfinished when it was built. Just to save money, I figured I could do that work myself, and I'm not going to say it was the absolute best quality work, but it's good enough for my taste anyway. And then with joint compound, there reaches a point where the more work you do, the more work you're going to continue to do. It's like you really just need to let it dry, sand it, and then do another round, because as you keep working with it, you get dried bits of compound on your tools, dried bits in your work, and then they just start to make everything worse. So at some point you just have to accept this is as good as it's going to get for now, let it dry, and then do it again for another round. And I think I've reached that point. When you use small bits of joint compound on projects, they tend to dry pretty quick, and you're just going to start creating little ridges. Now, if I was more prepared, I would have another one of these buckets available where I could just clean this bit off here that's starting to create problems. But you know what? We're going to leave this for now, see how it looks, and work on a second round maybe tomorrow. So that's it for now. I'll check in again here in a little bit. All right, so now what I'm doing is I'm taping off the flangeways on the insides of the rails before I do this mud in the middle. And the point of this obviously is to protect them from getting any mud in there, because it's going to be a real pain to get out. Now, when I did the test bed, I did get little bits in there, and I found the easiest way to handle that was just to use a small brush and dip it in water, and then just kind of brush out the mud, because it's all water-based, right? So once you thin it out enough with water, then it just kind of becomes all runny, and then it just kind of eventually settles down in between the ties, which that's fine, because once it dries and I paint it, you're not gonna be able to see it anyway. So, and I think that did work once I did go back and paint that up. So I'm just using, this is like 3/8 inch or 1/4 inch maybe masking tape. I got this at Hobby Lobby, and I'm just taping down the top of the tie more than anything, leaving some excess. And I found that as long as there's enough excess in here, once I pull the tape out, any mud that might have dried kind of just flips out with it. And that's how it worked the first time. We'll see if I repeat it the second time. But what I'm going to do now is get this mud out and just show you a little bit of this process of how I did this on the test bed, and we'll see if I can repeat it for the actual track. And then what I'll do is I'll leave this to dry overnight, so it's nice and plenty hard, and then I'll follow that up with maybe a little bit of sanding and another coat to get it as flat and smooth as possible. And what I'm doing here, and this is what I did in the test bed, I'll just try to fill this area as best as I can without overfilling it, and then I'll come back and scree it with that piece of styrene that I used before on the one that you see here on the section in the front. And all I'm trying to do is put enough material in the middle that when I scree it, it spreads out but doesn't overflow too much. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this off camera, because all I'm doing is trying to fill this void between these L girders that I've glued down to the track. And then once that's done, I'll scree it and I'll show you that part. So hang on, we'll be right back. Okay, so I've got that filled in. I did the best that I could using this tool to spread it out as best as I could. So now we're going to use my piece of styrene to make it as smooth as possible. There's a few gaps there I'm going to just try to fix real quick. And again, I'm going to come back and do another layer, so this part doesn't have to be perfect. If I can fill this in as smooth and as good as possible, it just means my second coat is just going to go on that much quicker and be easier. So I'm just going to do the best I can with this. All right, and that's about it for now. So what I'll do now is obviously clean my tools off and let this dry. I'm going to go ahead and pick the tape up so I can get the mud out while it's still wet. And I'll use this little flathead screwdriver here to kind of further clean out as much as I can. I could wait until it dries, but I think I pulled the tape while it was still wet because I'm not going to mess with the mud anymore anyway, so it doesn't matter. The tape doesn't need to be there. Mud's not going to just fall into the flangeway, so I think it'd be easier to clean that out while it's still wet. And that turned out pretty good. Sorry, just throwing the tape away there. And this side looks extra better because I already did the mud on the outside of the rails. So now let's take a close-up look and see how the flangeways look. Not too bad. Tape did its job for the most part. So I will go ahead and let it dry. I might go ahead and pick that little bit out there if I can. A little bit more there overflowed, so we'll go ahead and pick that out. But this other side I think looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit there I can pick out. Otherwise it looks pretty clean. So I'll clean those edges up, let this dry, and we'll see how it looks tomorrow. Okay, so I've let this dry overnight. Still looks pretty good. There's a few places where I tried to clean some things up last night before it dried, and it kind of chipped it a little bit, but that's not a big deal. I can fix that. I really just want to make sure that the gapping was still good with it dry to make sure, you know, a rail car would work. So I've got one here on the tracks, and we're going to give it a shot here. And that's pretty good. So we know that this works. So as you can see on this outer area, this one is kind of ugly, so I'm definitely going to have to touch that up. But as I said before, I kind of expected having to do a skim coat just to make it look a little bit nicer. So not a big deal. We're going to do that. But I think I learned that I need to do between the tracks before the outside of the tracks, because when I had taped off the rail to do this outside part, I had taped it on to the styrene, and when I pulled the tape off, I pulled the styrene off. So I think with the middle part done and the mud holding the styrene in place, I don't have to worry about that anymore. So definitely work on the inside of the tracks first and then do the outside. So next step will be to get the styrene taped or glued down for this track here. And then I can go ahead and keep working on across with the concrete. I also need to continue adding my styrene pieces here for the building foundations. These styrene sheets will be glued into place, and then my buildings will still be removable, but their footprint won't be affected. And that way I can go ahead and landscape and scenic right up to the foundations of all the buildings. And I still have to do all of these buildings that were back here. And then I can work on the concrete that goes right up to those foundations all around this scene. So I'll keep working on it and check in here in a little bit. All right, so what I've done now is I have drawn an outline for the footprints of these buildings here, because what I'm going to do, and you can kind of see how I've started here, I'm using this double stick tape again as a form for the concrete that I'm going to do along the tracks, and I'm using this so that I can do concrete right up to the edge of these buildings. And I don't know how much I'm going to add concrete here in the middle. I decided to go ahead and just do the form all the way around. We'll see what I end up doing, but that way it's just drawn once, and I'll have to go back and put the buildings back and do it again. But the reason that I'm doing this with the buildings, and I'll show you on the buildings themselves. So this is, I think, a storage structure as a part of the Portland cement plant. And you can see how at the bottom here, it's got a pretty thick foundation already. And you can see where the bottom of the garage door goes. So as you can imagine, you would want the concrete of your driving surface to go right up to the same level as the bottom of the garage door there, so you can just drive right in. And this just happens to be about the same thickness of concrete that I'm putting in. So that's why I'm using those forms, so I can go ahead and scree the concrete on the tracks right to the same level. And then once the concrete is dried, I can just set these buildings right into place. And over here you have the rest of this structure, and it's the same thing here. You have a garage door there with that gap to the bottom, and then you have this foundation for the clinker or whatever it's called all the way across. So that's why I've got those forms like that. So once all that concrete's in place, I'll be able to just set these buildings right in place. And I chose to do that differently than these unloading silos here, just because these were going to be a little bit more difficult to do forms around with those curves. So I just chose to do it that way. That was just a preference choice. And then for the unloading bay here, I just thought it didn't hurt to go ahead and add a little more height to that. Reasons, excuses, whatever you want to say, it doesn't matter. This is what I chose to do. So anyway, we'll see how this turns out. I've got to add more of these forms, and the tape looks different just because it's a different brand. This other brand didn't have any kind of graphics on it. This one does. I think this is like Scotch brand, so looks fancier, I guess. Whatever. So I just have to build that up, and we'll be ready to pour, so quote unquote, pour concrete for this whole area. So getting kind of exciting. I'm looking forward to how this will turn out. All right, so we've got the between the rails concrete, at least the first lay done, whatever, first pour, I guess you could say. I've gone back and done a skim coat on this one here. I think it's ready to be sanded. And I think instead of using sandpaper at the risk of scratching up the rails, I'm going to do some wet sanding, which should be enough for this small amount of sheetrock. I'm just really trying to take these ridges out that you can see here so it's a smooth surface. Since I'm going to be using this textured paint anyway, I don't think it's going to have to be super smooth, but I just don't want any like ridges and things that you see standing out there. So that's another step I'll be working on later. But for now, I'm going to just apply this center section of concrete. And looks like I need to go ahead and tape that other side there so I can go ahead and do all this other side as well. So I'll get back, or I'll get that done and then check back in. All right, so I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with the term wet sanding, but basically all it is you take like a sponge, and this is just a regular household dishwashing sponge, and I've got a little container of water here. You can use warm water. I don't know if it helps or not. I just have this, room temp water, and I just want to stick just the corner of the sponge to get it wet because I don't want to make a huge mess of everything. So I'm just kind of getting this little bit of corner wet, and then get that squeezed out so it's not dripping everywhere. And then on this strip here on the left side of the tracks, which is the one that I've gone back and done a skim coat on, I'm just kind of going over it lightly to knock down the ridges. Let's see if I can get you close enough to see that. So here's a ridge right there. We're going to see if we can get rid of that. We're just rubbing it. And I like to wet sand because I hate sanding in general anyway, but wet sanding yields almost no dust. And what dust there is kind of gets worked into the material. because basically what you're doing is you're making that joint compound wet again, and it's water-based, so it cleans easily. So all you're doing is just kind of making a smooth spot there, and you can kind of see how that works just like that. So I'm just going over this to get rid of all the ridges, and I think I've pretty well done that. So this section here is ready for me to remove this double stick tape that I was using for a frame. Hopefully that'll work. I'll probably go ahead and run a razor knife right along the seam here just to make sure when I pull the tape, it doesn't try to tear off any of the joint compound. It might tear the foam that it's sitting on. I'm hoping it won't be too bad because the foam is painted, so maybe that's made some kind of a seal, I don't know. If it does tear the foam, it's not that big a deal because, as I mentioned before, all this is going to be graveled anyway. So if there's extra holes I have to fill, not a big deal at all. So I'm going to take a little bit more work on this sanding until I'm pretty happy with it, which it's pretty well there now anyway. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a paint job on it, and we'll see how it looks once it's painted. All right, I decided to go ahead and show you what it looked like with the tape pulled away. You can see there's some voids where I didn't quite get the joint compound, smashed down enough. That's not going to be a big deal again because this is going to be bordered by rock, so it'll fill those voids no problem. And then you can also see how little damage pulling the tape did. Now I will say I didn't press super firmly when I laid the tape down to begin with, so I'm sure that's helpful. And I would guess that maybe the paint creating a base or a layer, I guess, between the actual foam and the tape probably helped some too. You can see there's a little bit of pitting there where it pulled the paint up. But otherwise, that's not that big a deal, right? That's going to be easy to work around since I'm going to be putting some gravel on top of that anyway. So I was worried there might be some big gaping holes or something like that. But again, you go back and fill those with some joint compound or glue or caulk or whatever you want to use. I went ahead and left some of this on because obviously I still have more track to do, so I didn't want to get carried away pulling tape off. And that's why I left this little corner down here on, because I still have to do a skim coat for this section between the tracks. But otherwise, I have to say everything is going very well. I'm not sure I will add any more to this particular video, so this might be me wrapping this one up. No, I think I will continue because I want to see how this thing looks all painted up, and I still have to do some more skim coats. So I'll go ahead and continue from here, and I might just cut this little part out. Okay, so as you can see here, I've got the first section of concrete done. I've gone ahead and painted it with that textured paint. It doesn't look too bad. I've got to come back and get right up to the edge of the rails with a better brush, or I need to tape off the rails, which I probably should have taped them off, but I want to try to get this done just for this video so I can come back and finish that. The last step will be to go back in and paint the interior of the rails, that rust color that I like, and to also kind of hide the bit of white parts, that kind of little bits of joint compound that got down in there that I couldn't protect completely. So I think with just a generic rust color, that'll help to hide that. I might go back and add some earth tones down there because obviously, in track like this, dust and dirt gets brushed in there, water carries it in there. So might try some different colors, but that's kind of getting into the super detailing aspect of things that I'm not going to get into right now. There is one other thing that I wanted to show you that worked out about as good as I could have hoped, and that's this cutout here that I left for this structure. So I'm going to place that now so you can see how that worked out. So pretty much a perfect fit there. So that worked really well. Very happy with that. Obviously, I still have all the rest of the structures to go, but this was a very good first test. I think I'll go ahead and update you with one more clip here once I get those interiors painted to see how it looks. So I'll check back in here in a little bit. So this is what I'm calling the more or less, I guess we'll call it the good enough for now final product of pouring concrete for the first time on HO scale track. I really enjoyed doing this, and I look forward to doing a lot more. There's a lot of other areas on my layout that I'm going to be adding concrete, and it took me a while to get this much done, but I've learned a lot in this process and learned that if I do an entire track at one time, it saves me a lot of time with taping and untaping and painting and this, that, and the other. So that's something I've learned for the next time, but I'm really happy with the final results. And as you can see here, cars still maneuver over the top of the rails with no problem. So very happy with the final look and results. So I guess that's about it for now. If you have any questions about how I did this, please don't hesitate to ask. And if you have any opinions or suggestions for how I can improve, by all means, share that too. I'm by no means a professional at this. This is my first effort. But from watching a few channels and taking some tips, I'm pretty happy with the results. So that's about it for now. Thanks for watching.